Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
a podcast for parents, college counselors, students, and anyone who wants a weekly deep dive into the world of college admissions.
My name is Lynda, and I'm originally from Michigan, now living in the St. Louis metro area. I'm a college coach with School Match for You and have a daughter at University of Chicago.
I'm Lisa, and I'm a clinical psychologist and college counselor. I have a daughter in college, a daughter in high school, and a son in middle school. After 30 years in Chicago, we recently moved to North Carolina.
My name is Mark. I'm a college coach in Atlanta and the parent of two daughters. Karis, a graduate of Davidson College, and she is the founder of the Spanish tutoring company, SpanishHelpToday.com. And Joy is a wellness coach at the Keenan Flagler Business School at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. And I'm so blessed to be able to work alongside both my beautiful daughters at School Match for You, college counseling firm that I founded in 2010. Good afternoon, friends. If you're new to the Your College Bound Kid podcast, our mission is to make college knowledge available to all. And we do that by providing 10 hours of commercial-free content, thanks to the generosity of our listeners, with new episodes dropping every Monday and every Thursday. And I'm in a great mood today. So I'm always in a great mood when I meet with you guys. It's very inspirational knowing that we have a lot of listeners who listen to every episode. It's just very inspirational. But I'm also in a great mood for a lot of other reasons. First of all, I'm a little bit of a basketball junkie. I used to post a lot on this Michigan State message board back like in 2000. That's when we won our national championship. So 2000 to 2006, and my moniker on there was Hoophead. So I really do like basketball. I stopped doing it just because it was addicting and I needed to do other things with my time. But for the last 34 years, there have only been 4 Game 7s in the NBA Finals, and we have one tonight. This whole Oklahoma City, Indiana series has been so suspenseful, so much fun. I'm super stoked about tonight. And, a lot of times people in my family, they always kind of tease me. They're like, you don't have any patriotism. You were born in Canada. Where's the Canadian patriotism? I became like a U.S. citizen like 35 years ago. But I'm feeling a little bit in my bones tonight because Shea Gilgeous-Alexander, SGA, also known as Shea Butter, the MVP of the league, he grew up like really close to Dave in Toronto, not too far from me. So, sorry, Indiana, but I'm pulling for OKC, and I think we're going to win. By the time you guys hear this, you'll know if I'm right or wrong. We also have a Counselors Connect meeting tonight, and I'm pretty pumped about that. We're having a 60-minute conversation about AI and college admissions. First 30 minutes will be in the large group, the last 30 minutes in the small group format. And we're talking about AI and college admissions. And from a technology standpoint, the internet is the biggest change in society technologically that I feel I've seen in my life. But I'm not going to be surprised if AI changes society more than the internet. I can't even believe I'm saying that. Especially when it comes to shaking up which jobs are in demand, which ones are obsolete, which ones are changing. And I've been reading quite a bit about this. I'm hoping I can have an expert we can interview to come on and talk about how AI is going to change jobs. But from what I've been reading, as many as 50% of the entry-level white-collar jobs are going to be gone in the next few years. Now, that doesn't mean it's 50% unemployment. Obviously, there'll be some new jobs created. And we have this ongoing debate. I've got a little message group with Dave and my brother Norm. Dave and I are on the side of this could be pretty scary for society, meaning it looks to us like more jobs are going to be eliminated than created. And my brother Norm, he's dug in on the opposite view. He's such a story, and he takes us through the past couple hundred years and all the way back to Industrial Revolution. Everything is they've been saying this for hundreds of years. And what happens? New jobs get created. And then Dave counters, look at Youngstown, Ohio. It still hasn't come back. So it's kind of a really spirited debate that we have. But I'm trying to track this and follow this. The talk is, from at least my initial research, that some of the places that are going to get hit the hardest are finance, law, consulting, technology, data analysts, copywriters, customer service reps, bookkeepers, accountants, software developers, and coders, especially entry level, and market researchers. And when I was in Texas, I had a meeting with a family that I'm working with, and one of the parents has a very strong background in this area, and he was telling me that AI does more for him now than the 3 data analysts who used to work for him. So, it's a very, very important topic. It's so important, in fact, that we're having a special speaker come and speak to Counselors Connect on this topic again later in the year. So this is the 100 of us internally talking amongst ourselves, and we're going to have a special speaker. So I think it's important. So I'm stoked about that, even though it's a little scary, I have to admit. The third reason I'm so happy is I'm just loving seeing these crepe myrtles and these hardy hibiscuses pop with the resplendent colors. You've got to take a trip to Georgia in late June, July, August. I know people's like, that's when it's hot and it can be humid, but the colors are just popping. It's just really, really awesome. And I'm also stoked because there's something new that we're going to do on Your College Bound Kid. This actually just got confirmed within the last 48 hours. And we're going to do it later this summer. It has me really fired up. And so I'm going to be sharing that with you in this episode as well. I also want to continue with my conversation about what is holistic admissions, how it's misunderstood. And I decided to make that a 3-part conversation because as I was prepping, I just had so much I wanted to say. And this is going to be like a crazy long episode. And, our sound engineer, I pay by the minute. So the longer the episodes, the more we pay for, the more we end up paying. But also we're trying to keep these Monday ones a little shorter. I don't think I've been that successful at that. Originally, the goal was an hour and a half on Thursday and 40 minutes on Monday, but I try not to be too rigid about that. So you hear part 2 of 3 today on holistic admissions. And then I'm also going to be sharing 2 very similar conversations I had in the counseling room, both this week, one with the Midwest family, one with the West Coast family. So I'm hoping you can kind of learn from that. And then we're going to have part 3 of the interview with Jay Hall, the college dean, writer, and podcaster, and author of the book College Unpacked. So Lynda's doing that interview, and they'll continue their conversation about how a student can successfully transition to college. By the way, friends, I forgot to mention this on Thursday, but the entire Jay Hall interview is available at yourcollegebounkid.com right now under the interviews tab. The entire Dr. Bob McMahon, president of Kettering University, that's been up for over a week. And I know both the final part of the Jay Hall and the Dr. Bob McMahon interviews have not aired yet. But for those who like to listen to an entire interview without the part 1, part 3, part 5, you can listen to it all in one audio segment there, right on yourcollegebounkid.com under the interviews tab. I also have some more good news. Every couple months, somebody would reach out to us and say, the interview is not working for me, trying to use it off the player on the website. And it's probably about a year ago. I remember it was right after the interview aired on homeschooling that we did a little digging, and it looked like Safari wasn't working for some people. So we actually put an announcement, not we, Stylianis, our webmaster, put an announcement right up on there that interviews may not work with Safari. Well, this week I had somebody reach out to me and say, it's not working for me, and I'm not even using Safari, and it's also not working for my husband or my dad. So I'm like, all right, this is not working. So I reached out to Stylianis, and our webmaster from Serbia, who's fantastic, by the way. And I said, Stylianis, there has to be another option. So he found a podcast player that all the testing indicates it's working on all devices from interview 232 on. So if anybody has any challenges at all, please send an email to me at marketschoolmatch4u.com. Let me know if you're having any problems. And if you were having problems before using our player, check it out now at 232 or 233, our 2 most recent interviews, and let me know if it's working for you. All indications are so far that this is fixing our problem. Okay, I want to share the new feature that we're going to be bringing to you. And I want to share it right away, but it's related to the holistic admissions topic. So I'm going to do part 2 for you on holistic admissions first, and then I'll share the new idea that's got me really excited. So hopefully you heard last week. If not, I recommend you go back and hear part 1 last week. And if you did, I described holistic admissions as also whole person admissions, or taking context into consideration. And that's true. And let me say something else. Holistic admissions almost always stems from a fundamental core belief, which is college is a learning laboratory. And if we can assemble a group of highly motivated students from all types of different backgrounds and put them together, they're going to learn more than if we put them in a homogeneous environment that's packed with students that are all from the same backgrounds. That's almost always the belief, and people believe that to their core. Also, colleges are businesses and they need to function. That means they need to be able to pay their bills. So that also plays a role. So I've said this part before, the part I'm going to say today about the academic review, but I haven't said the next part that I'm going to share today in some detail, which is the single biggest factor that determines who gets in and who doesn't get in to a college that does holistic admissions. All right. So let me first start with the academic review, because the very first thing that colleges are doing when they open a file, I would say there's 2 things going on in people's minds. One is, can this person do the academic program? Can they do the program? Because if not, you're dead on arrival. And the second thing is also a little bit of, who is this person? I'm trying to get to know you more, right? So you think 2 things that you can walk and chew gum, right? So those are 2 of the main things going on. Who is this person and can they do the program? One of the things a college cannot have is a faculty member tapping an admission director on the shoulder and saying, how did this kid get into my class? They can't do the work. That's like an admission officer's nightmare. So initially, there's a vetting that occurs. Can the person do the program? And there are a few things that are part of that vetting. You're going to look at the rigor of the curriculum. You're going to look at the grades the student has, obviously the grading scale. You're going to look at the grading trends. You're going to look at the high school they're coming from. You're going to look at the testing, if there's standardized testing in the file, if it's either a test mandatory school or if it's a test optional school and there's testing in the file. And depending on the role major plays in your school, you may also look at fit to major. So in other words, how does this student's academic preparation credentials line up with the major or majors? You a lot of times see on applications where they'll say, list your first 2 majors. That's a telltale sign that they're evaluating you through the context of not only the competition, but how they feel you're prepared or not prepared to succeed in the majors you express interest in. So that's all going on initially. And I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, we get new listeners all the time. My favorite example I like to use for this is flying on a plane. And this is the part that I call getting through the security gate. And I like to use that because if you don't get through the security gate, you're not getting on the plane. It's not happening. So that's another way of saying if you don't pass the academic review, you have 0 chance of ever getting into the school. However, on 2 different occasions, and both of these were very painful. One was in Salt Lake City, and I was on a layover for another flight. And I got into a long conversation and I wasn't by my gate, and I missed the flight. So I made it through the security gate, but I never got on the flight. Another time that also happened to me, I was flying to, this is 2019. I'll never forget this because I was spending a week at Harvard doing training there for their secret program. And I can't remember all the details, but it was one of those times where they said, we're not boarding luggage. There's some complication going on. So take your luggage through the security gate. So, I have my I'm there for a week. So I got a big, pretty significant amount of luggage. It's not just a little carry-on bag. And I get in this conversation on the elevator with this guy, get all the way to the gate, and I realize, snap, where's my luggage? So I'd let it go through the security gate and whatever, I just bolted, I guess. So by the time I got back, and then I couldn't find the security gate. This is Atlanta, by the way, which is the busiest airport in the world. So I missed my flight. Anyway, I digress. The point is, just because you make it through the security gate, or just because you passed the academic review, doesn't mean you're getting on the plane. It doesn't mean you're getting into the school. But a conversation I like to talk to everybody about is what percentage of your students make it through the academic review. And I almost always hear the same thing. And it is 70 to 80%, 70 to 80%, 73, Dartmouth said. I can't remember all the different schools, 75, 70, 80. Duke was on the higher end. University of Chicago, the only school to give me a lower number than that. I asked them when I was there, 2022, 65%. And that was the lowest, first time I've ever heard a number in the 60s. So the point is most people pass that, right? They can do the work. But let's say a school admits 15%, and let's just say regular admissions. And let's say 75% make it through the academic review. The question is, how does the school get from 75 to 15? And that's what I'm going to be talking about for the rest of today in part 2 of 3 on holistic admissions, as well as next week. I can't stress what I'm going to say enough. This is going to vary from school to school. Not all the things I'm going to talk about are factors at all for some schools, but a lot of them are, and they're all factors for a lot of schools. So I'm going to share some of the most common factors that will be used to explain how a college gets from 75% to 15%. And by the way, the same principles apply. I just picked a number, 15%. I wanted to pick something to show, okay, there has to be a lot of winnowing out here to get from 75 to 15. So I just went with 15, but let's say the number was 35%. A lot of the same principles apply, getting from 75 to 35, or 5%. I will add one caveat. The lower the school's admit rate, usually but not always, the more factors that I'm going to talk about factor in. Because normally the most selective schools use the most comprehensive, robust, whole person admission approach. To quote Janet Rappley, former chief admission officer at Princeton, at a highly select, she was asked, does this count more? Does that count more? Does this count more? Does that count? She said, at a highly selective school, everything counts. So, the more selective the school, the more these factors tend to be used. But let's not get hung up on that. So one of the biggest misunderstandings I see comes from people who think that things like GPA test scores are linear, meaning this student had higher grades and test scores than that student. This is messed up. The one with the lower grades got in over the one with the higher grades. The one with the lower scores got in over the one with the higher scores. And that reflects a lack of understanding of how academic factors are weighed in the admission decision. They're mostly pass-fail. They're mostly used to screen who's acceptable admit than they are to align a school up in a linear way to see who has the better metrics. Okay? I'm not trying to say that someone that's got the best metrics that a school's ever seen and someone that squeaks by, that there's not any recognition of that. It can factor into an academic rating. But just know they're mostly used to say, okay, can this person do the program? Now let's look at what they'll bring to our community. And that's where the screening out occurs. So what factors are considered? Today I'm just going to focus on one. But it's, in my opinion, especially for highly selective schools, by far and away the biggest one. By far and away the biggest one. And I mean biggest in terms of at least partially, if not significantly, explaining why the kids that are admitted got admitted. Why two kids that have the exact same academic profile, not that that actually happens in reality. So let's just say extremely similar academic profiles, why one kid gets in and one doesn't. It's not the only factors. Next week, I'll get into some of the other ones, but it's the one that explains the majority of those decisions. And if you're curious what it is, I'd love to know. I wish I could just read everybody's mind right now, or have some, sometimes you go to these conferences and they have it set up that you just vote right away and you can see what the audience thinks. So I wish I had the ability to do that right now, because I'm curious how many people would get it. But, we don't have the ability to do that. So you can guess in your own mind what you think it would be. But I'll tell you what it is. It's institutional priorities, also called IPs. Now, let's break that down, because that sounds so theoretical. That sounds so opaque. That sounds almost arcane. Institutional priorities. What the heck is that? Well, let's talk about some other ways of understanding it. It's institutional needs. It's fill in the blank to this question. Doesn't matter what college. Pick your alma mater. Doesn't matter what it is. Or your kids, or your kid. If say you had a kid in college. Think of their school. We would be a better school if we had more blank kids. That's going to be an institutional need. That's going to be an institutional priority. So I believe a picture's worth 1,000 words, and I believe a lot of times an analogy explains things better than talking. So I'll see if I can give an analogy, and hopefully that will help. So pretend you're a principal at a school, and you've got a problem. You are short 3 teachers in 3 very important subject matters. You need a SPED teacher, which is just an acronym for special ed. You need a SPED teacher, special ed. You need a math teacher. You need a science teacher. Okay, so you put an ad out and you get 40 amazing applicants. You get like 100 applicants, but 40 are pretty amazing for the positions. And you get this one applicant, and they're a history teacher. And they look absolutely phenomenal. They look like they'd be as good as any history teacher you have on your staff. They look like they actually may be the strongest teacher of all of them. And it's possible that you'll make room for that teacher because they're just so amazing. But the chances are you're going to take the B+ science, B+ math, or B+ SPED teacher over the A+ history teacher because your high school could always use another great history teacher, but it's essential that you have that science, math, or SPED teacher for your institution, your school to run properly. That's how IPs are, and that's why they're so powerful. And they're also known as hooks. They're also known as putting an extra thumb on the scale. Now, in Harry Bald's outstanding book on college admissions essay, it's called On Writing the College Application Essay, and it came out a long time ago, but the 25th edition came out in 2012. Bald says one of the most important things that can help people to understand how admissions decisions are made. Now, first of all, a little bit about Bald's background. Bald was a former admission officer at both Brown and Columbia, and then he went on to be a legendary college counselor. So, I love people that have been on both sides of the desk, and especially at multiple schools and with a lot of experience. So this is what Bald says. You can take the entire applicant pool and divide it into 2 groups. Now, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about the first group and then a little time on the second group. So the first group is what he says, those with a built-in lobbyist. Now, what does that mean? It means somebody in the admissions office who's going to go to work and fight for the kid. Just think about political groups, right? There's lobbyists that work K Street in Washington, in D.C., right? There's all kinds of industries that work for their constituencies. One of the reasons it looks like this onerous endowment tax may not pass, or if it passes, it's certainly not going to pass anywhere near like what it looked like, is colleges beefed up significantly the amount of money they invested in lobbyists to go work Washington, D.C. and get to the politicians and convince them this is not going to be a good decision. So that's how lobbyists work. You got somebody advocating for you. You got somebody fighting for you. So as Bald says, you can divide the whole admission pool into 2 groups. Those who have a built-in lobbyist. Now, Bald talks about 4 groups that he feels have a built-in lobbyist in his book. And I agree with his 4, but remember, this book is written in 2012. It's almost 14 years ago. So I'm going to add some additional groups that also have lobbyists. But Bald identifies these 4: recruited athletes, big donors, kids of big donors. These are what oftentimes are called advancement admits or development admits. They either have given a lot to the school the kid is applying to, or they have a lot of potential to give a lot to the school. Like I've shared this once before, but I did a year of fundraising. And it was a great experience for me. But this was 25 years ago, school-based fundraising for Westtown Boarding School. I didn't realize before I did that, this is 25 years ago, but we had software that let us know the potential of everybody in the stakeholder class. So that's lots of people, right? It's parents of alum, faculty and staff, alum. I mean, it's just so many different constituencies. And then what we called friends of the school. We literally had software, and we knew this person has potential to give like a 7-figure gift or a 6-figure gift or a 5-figure gift or whatever. So it could be big donors that have already given, or it could be someone with enormous potential. And normally those people with enormous potential have also shown the proclivity to give toward other educational institutions that they're affiliated with. The third group BALD identifies as members of historically underrepresented groups. And then the last group he identifies as children of alumni, oftentimes known as legacy. So I agree with BALD, as I said, but there are a bunch of others he didn't include. But I totally agree with his concept of the lobbyist. Some have a built-in lobby and some don't. Some of the others I would include, and I'm sure he would include if he was to write a 2025 version, celebrity kids. Why are celebrity kids so important? Because of the marketing the school gets. I mean, I remember when Dave went to Princeton, and I still remember, this is in the early 80s. I still remember the publicity they got because Brooke Shields was going to Princeton. A lot of colleges do special tours just for celebrities so that, people aren't sitting there gawking at a movie star when they're right beside your kid and, can you believe that? Just this person's on. These are special tours, but it's not unknown to the school that you get a lot of publicity if you have a celebrity come. Like that sends a powerful message, and one that you like for your marketing. Faculty and staff. Paul never mentioned faculty and staff kids and administrators kids, and that's school by school, right? Complete non-factor for UCs, major factor for some other schools. Siblings. It's another group. A lot of times siblings, depending on the school, it gets kind of bucketed in with alumni and legacy. Some schools count current siblings more in their pecking order than they do legacies, especially if it's legacies that were not legacy donors. And I want to expand on his term, historically underrepresented groups. But before I get to that, I also want to mention another group, and that's high-level performing artists. Sure, way more spots go to athletes, but it can absolutely be a hook to be a high-level singer, high-level actor, bassoonist, or any other instrument that's needed for the orchestra or band, dancer, high-level performer artist can be a hook. All right, let me get back to something that Paul talked about. He said historically underrepresented groups. So I think a better term for this is compositional diversity, because it encompasses all the different ways in which somebody's background might be an extra thumb on the scale for certain schools. So let's just start with some of the financial categories that could be part of compositional diversity. Being a full pay family is a major plus in some instances. Now, the more selective the school, the less of it's a factor because they get so many that it doesn't stand out. And you've heard me say this a million times, colleges want what they don't have. But for a lot of schools, being a full pay family, that's a big deal. Applying early decision, a big deal. Let's go to the other side of the spectrum. Being a Pell Grant recipient. It's just happened maybe in the last 15 years, but all of a sudden this is something schools like wear as a badge of honor. Look at our diversity. We have X number of Pell Grant kids, and some of it is because it started getting factored into the rankings and some rankings, and then what gets inspected gets expected. Being first gen, that can be important to schools because just like schools look for students that will come in and make a big splash and make a difference, they want to make a big splash. When they see a first gen kid, they're like, we can change the entire trajectory of this kid's lineage for generations. Okay, being out of state or being in state. And that could work either way. A school could have a priority to get more out of state kids, or it could be legislated from the Board of Regents. They have to have a certain number of in-state kids. The last, I'd say, 10 years has been a big focus on rural diversity. We've certainly got gender diversity. We've got geographic region diversity, and even specific states or regions. We have international diversity. We have political diversity, sometimes called perspective diversity. And then we have experiential diversity, different experiences. So, for example, let's say a kid has been a foster kid, and a school might be like, wow, we want that. This kind of also perspective diversity, right? We want that perspective that they bring to the classroom and to the dining halls and to the dorms. Let's say somebody was raised in a totally different country, or they moved around a lot. Or let's say they went from millionaire to welfare, or they went from welfare to millionaire. That's an interesting perspective. We'd like to have our students meet somebody with that background. Those are all different types of diversity. Then we have undersubscribed majors. That can be a really big deal, because you might have to lay faculty off if you don't get more kids interested in certain majors. And also, you might believe that certain majors are really important for a well-balanced experience, and if people don't express interest in that. Once again, not every school looks at this. Schools where the major plays a big role in admissions, of course, are going to be much different than the interdisciplinary schools that don't put as much emphasis, but they still can do it if they feel like they might have to lay faculty off, or if their financial model's not working well, meaning we got 4 or 5 kids in that class, we can't continue to pay. So that could play a role. And then these factors can combine. So you could have the male nursing major, which is underrepresented within that major, who's from Idaho. So you're getting an underrepresented geographic region coupled with an underrepresented demographic, males in an underrepresented major, males in nursing. The other thing to notice in all these factors are equal. So a recruited athlete is not the same in squash or tennis, volleyball, or most sports, cross country, as it is in football or basketball, because those are revenue producing sports. In fact, an observation that I've had over the years, I've never really read anything on this, it's just something I've noticed over the years, that if your hook or your institutional priority brings money into the school, it's usually an extra thumb on the scale, meaning it's more of a significant hook. I attempt to do something that I really was hard to do, but I attempted to rate all the hooks. And I produced my Game Changer video series I worked on from 2012 to 2014. I graded them from A+ all the way down, according to, just from my experience, how much they carried weight in the admission process. So that was a tough task to do that. But there's no question that if you're going to be playing a sport that draws spectators together, puts you on national TV, and funds the whole entire athletic budget, like basketball and football oftentimes do, and there's some exceptions. There's a few schools where hockey brings revenue. There's a few where baseball brings revenue, and there's a couple sports where gymnastics does. But for the most part, most of those sports usually don't. Then that's going to carry more weight. So there's a correlation with money. If you're full pay and a school doesn't have very many full pay, or they're really struggling to stay afloat, that can be pretty significant, right? If schools are getting they have to admit 10 kids to get one, and you apply ED, and now there's about a 97% chance you're going to come. And there's always a little bit of slippage in D. We've talked in the past about some of the reasons why it's not 100%. I'm not going to get into that now, but it's a very high percentage of ED accepts that are going to matriculate. Those things tend to carry more weight. So that's the great news. The great news is this: a lot of kids fall into one of these categories. A lot of kids. The bad news is what Bald, who, remember, Harry Bald was an admission officer at both Brown and Columbia before becoming a legendary college counselor, what he calls everybody else. And his name for everybody else is, and he puts it in bold font in this book, just folks. Everybody else is in the just folks bucket. Everybody else is just like that amazing history teacher who may be the best overall teacher of the 40 that were seriously considered, but they get passed over for the math, science, or SPED teacher because while you're nice, you aren't seen as necessary. And holistic admissions is social engineering. It's looking and saying, who do we need in our student body to make our school a better school, and who within this applicant pool is meeting our needs? All right, I'm going to stop here on part 2. I'm going to come back with part 3. And I know what some of you are thinking, because I know I would probably be thinking it. This is very disturbing, and this is very demotivating. You just described my kid as chopped liver. You just described my kid as just folks. My kid is screwed after listening to this. Well, the good news is in part 3, I'm going to share at least 3 other areas where kids that don't have any of the things BALD identified or from my expanded list of IPs, institutional priorities, or hooks, that can still help you get through the selective admission process. So if you're curious, come back next week for the final part. All right, let's start by sharing something new we're doing later in the summer on the podcast that has me ecstatic. I'm just out gardening, and sometimes when I'm out amongst nature, like some of my best ideas pop in my head. I find my best ideas happen when I am either praying or just out amongst nature. So I reached out to Hillary this week, and I'm like, Hillary, how do you feel about taking our listeners through an admissions case studies? So right away, Hillary loved it immediately. And she's like, let me just talk to Matt, bounce it off Matt. Matt, thumbs up, all good. Matt, director of admission, Hillary's boss. Now, the details are going to be announced in an upcoming episode. I don't have all the details now, but what I can do today is share how case studies work. So Colorado College will select 3 applications and anonymize them. In fact, Hillary's like, I'm going to go to work right now. I've done lots of these again, but I'm going to go to work right now and anonymize them even more. So you're not going to know who the real applicant is. And we're going to make these 3 applications available to you to read. And then you have an assignment. You can only accept one, waitlist one, and deny one. Now, don't think you're going to see one student with all F's and D's and behavioral issues, and then another student who's, absolutely crushing it, not only with academics, but also with character and contributions. These decisions tend to be hard, and that's the point. So what I'm hoping to do is set up a Google form for you to vote. And you got to go on and pick who do you accept, who do you deny, who do you waitlist after you read the files. And put your reasons down. I was talking to Jen on our team about this, and she had a great idea. She's like, if people put their reasons down, you could throw that into one of these language learning models, and it'll print out for you what most people thought was the reason why they went with the one kid. You can crowdsource it. So I'm like, oh, this is getting pretty neat. But then Hillary's going to lead a discussion with a few other admission officers, and they may or may not just be from Colorado College. She might even pull somebody in that's not at Colorado College, or she may use other staffers. And they're going to discuss how they talk through these decisions after you've read the files. And you can see what factors they included and who they chose to admit, deny, waitlist based on how they assessed each applicant. What makes case studies so great is it's such a learning tool because you have to take all the things that you've learned about what matters in the selection process and put all the pieces together. So I'm very excited about this. I've been through this, I don't even know how many times, lots and lots of times. Also, some of my students, especially those who are at independent schools, a lot of times schools will lead these for students and parents. And when I talk to the students and parents, they find it incredibly helpful to help them to understand, first of all, how hard these decisions are, but just all the different factors that can come into play when you're deciding who to admit and not admit. So I can't give you an exact date we're going to do it, but we definitely want to do this in the next 60 days. So stay tuned for more details. All right. I want to share 2 counseling situations I had this week that were really similar. And by the way, what I'm going to share is happening a lot right now. So in both cases, the families are not going to qualify for any need-based aid, but it was going to be really tough to pay full price at the most expensive schools. Probably wasn't going to be an option. In both cases, a spouse lost a job in 2025, meaning that the income was going to be significantly lower for 2025. And in both cases, they said to me, what do we do? Now, in order to understand this, you have to know a couple of things. There's something called the base year when it comes to financials and assessing an ability to pay. The base year is 2 years before the fall of the year your student starts. So that means that rising seniors will start high school in the fall of 2025. They will graduate May or June of 2026, and they will start college in fall of 2026. So 2 years before 2026 is 2024. So the base year is 2024. What that means is that's the year that all of the calculations are done to figure out how much money somebody can afford to pay for college. But the problem is, what happens if your income goes down after the base year? So what do you do? So I just want to share some of the things that I shared with those families, because a lot of people are losing jobs right now, especially federal workers. It's really, really been tough in the DMV area, DC, Maryland, Virginia. But other parts of the country, there's government workers all over. I've really heard some horror stories in the last 6 months. It's been bad. 3 months. It's been bad. The other thing that you have to do is you have to have a public school that you have a high probability of being admitted to, that you would be happy to attend. Now, that could be in-state, it could be out-of-state. That's going to depend on your budget and your pocketbooks. You could be targeting honors colleges, but unless it's crystal clear that you're going to get in, you can't rely 100% on that. But you basically have to cover yourself financially. And one way to do that is to embrace a public school, not the most expensive private schools. Not just that you're going to get in, but you're happy to go to and attend. So one thing you want to do is make sure that you have multiple schools on your list with a proven track record of giving generous merit money for students with your kid's profile. That's important because the need-based assessment is likely to come back, and that's not going to be doable for you. So that's one thing. You got to do that. Second is, if you're looking at these schools that promise to meet full demonstrated need, there's like 75 to 80 of them. There's good news and bad news, with those schools. Parents need to start talking now with the financial aid officers. Now, you're like, Stuck, didn't you just tell me the kid's the one who should reach out? This is a little different. This is complicated stuff. This is highly technical and parent-based. Nothing is wrong with the parent reaching out here. And when the parent talks to the financial aid officers, they're going to go over what's going on. Like, here's the deal. You're going to use the base year for my calculations, but I don't make that much anymore. And you're going to find several different policies that schools have. One is suck it up, butter. Basically means there's nothing that we can do about it. It is what it is. And that can be two variations. Some of them will say, here's the good news. In 2027, we'll make the adjustment because this year will be 2025 and your income will have gone down. And so we'll make the adjustment. So it will be tough your first year, but you'll get the benefit the second year. And of course, you want to get this stuff, and it's nice to have an email track record with this stuff. And then others are like, whatever you come in on, that's kind of what you come in on. You don't see that as much with the schools that meet full demonstrated need, but there are schools that are like that. Like the level of aid you come in on is the level that we expect to continue to give you. So you want to find out their policies. Others will be very receptive to making an adjustment. They'll be like, well, of course you're not living off 2024 income anymore. So some of them will ask for your 2025 returns, because remember, starting in 2026. And then some of them will ask for your 2026 pay stubs, because you're starting in fall of 2026. So, there's still a lot of time in 2026 to have not W-2s, but to have pay stubs. Now, you do need to work hard at not letting your kid get emotionally attached to any school. That's really important. You also need to go through the rigorous process of figuring out exactly how much you can afford to pay and be crystal clear with your kid what the max is you're willing to pay. And you don't just want to grab a number out of the sky. You literally want to go through your entire budget, look at every single thing you're paying for all your expenses, and you want to see how many of your expenses for your student are going to be gone. I mean, they're not going to have that summer camp anymore that you paid for, or that cheerleading this, or all the running around and all the food and, utilities. There's a lot of things, SAT, all the things when you go through and look at it. A lot of times, I had one family, this family didn't even make that much money. In fact, they felt the most they could pay was $15,000 for college, but they went all the way through this exercise and they came away and they found another $15,000 that they were going to have because of all the enrichment that they were paying. And especially, what if you're paying private school? So you want to, factor that in and come up with the maximum amount you can pay. You want to figure out what your students going to do. Are they going to do loans? If so, how much? Are they going to work? If so, how much? Are they going to work in the summer, work in the school year? You want to be crystal clear with your student. This is the most that we're willing to pay. And be very clear about that. One thing I see too many families do that I work with, and I push back when they do this, but they'll say something like, we're not going to qualify for need-based aid, but we're not paying $100,000. The most we're paying is X. Could be any number. Could be 40, could be 65, it could be any number. But then they'll say, but we just want to take a look at XYZ school, like Tufts or, Northwestern or Georgetown or Brown. It's one of these schools that doesn't give merit-based aid. And I always push back on them because what is the message you're sending to your kids? Like, your kids are like, so am I going to go all the way through here, get in, and then I can't go? You just want to see if I got in? Or are you kind of saying, I don't think we're willing to pay that much, but maybe we would for this school? Which is oftentimes what it is. And I understand it's hard. People are trying to figure out the value add. And is it worth it? Like, we could make it happen if we had to. We don't want to, but we could. Is it worth this level of sacrifice? I get it's really not that black and white where you just know that automatically. Maybe if you visit, you'll see the value and maybe you'll change your mind, right? So I get it. But the problem is it creates a yo-yo effect with the kid because I'm telling you, it's really painful for them to get in. And then you say we can't pay. And then they're just not sure. And it's not that easy to just turn the emotions off of getting invested or not getting invested. That's why I liken it to a family that has a $500,000 budget for a house, but they have a realtor showing them $1 million houses. Or a family with a $40,000 budget for a car and you're going to the lot and they're showing you $80,000 cars. To me, it doesn't make sense. I think you need to go through that process and make some of these decisions ahead of time. Otherwise, you're just kind of putting your kid on an emotional yo-yo string that's incredibly difficult. So you need to tread lightly with ED in a situation like this, because one of the things about ED is that you're going to be applying ED, and if it's a senior or rising senior, by November of 2025. You're going to be applying ED. And the problem with that is you won't even have full tax returns yet. So it's just going to be harder to win that case because there's not as much evidence to show them that, yeah, look, my income really, really did go down. But it's all case by case. Every school's a little different. And it's not just, well, the super wealthy schools will do this adjustment policies and those that don't. No, I can think of certain extremely wealthy schools that have the policy of it is what it is. And I can think of other schools, normally these are wealthy because for you to be able to have that type of need to, there's a short list of schools that meet full demonstrated need to begin with, and then to be able to handle these type of disruptions. But amongst two wealthy schools, they can have completely different policies. And certainly before I went through with anything like this, I would be in regular communication with the financial aid officer. And then the last thing I would say is if, let's say, everything looks good for you and you can apply ED and it looks like they're going to make an adjustment, then, and I do this for other people, that even if there's not a job loss, like when you read that ED language, it says as soon as you get in, pull all the other acceptances. Well, there's a caveat in there. Assuming that the school comes through with the finances that all indications are they would, whether that's a net price calculator, a full tax return review, or individual conversations with financial aid officers. Don't pull the rest of your applications until you have in, and just know that's no ethical violation. So hopefully this was helpful. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this episode. It's a little different than what we normally do. Now transition to Lynda's interview with Jay Hall.
And now this week's interview with a special guest.
Friends, it's time for part 3 of Jay Hall's interview with Lynda Depker. Jay opens up by giving some academic advice for students transitioning to college. Jay talks about things like procrastination, professors who don't give grace for missed deadlines or hardships, and how this is inevitable, so you need to be ready for it. Jay talks about the systems colleges have in place to detect plagiarism and abuse of AI in writing, and he talks about how important it is to know these policies and how about every professor can have a different policy. Jay talks about all the resources that are on the college campus to support students that students need to be aware of and students need to tap into. Jay gives some great advice about what to do when everything goes wrong, like it inevitably will. Listen and enjoy.
Let's talk about the classroom. Maybe not other things are going to happen besides meeting your future spouse. But a lot of times, students, I think, they've been a good student in high school and college is different. So, what are some of those common academic pitfalls you see students falling into?
The biggest one, I think, is particularly for those students who were successful in high school. College is different. And the same level of effort that was put in school may not be sufficient for a college class. And it might be, here's the deal. Everybody says all your classes are going to be hard. That's not true. Some of your college classes are going to be really easy, but some of them be far more rigorous than, not necessarily than you're prepared for, but than you've experienced before. And so just coming in with the mindset of this might be more than I've ever had to mess with in terms of workload, expectation, in terms of rigor, whatever that looks like. I think students sometimes assume, oh, I can knock this out, which is another thing. Everything's going to take longer than you think it will. That 5-page paper, when you were in sophomore English, you could kick out in no time flat because you didn't have to do a lot of research or you didn't have to cite stuff or whatever. It's a different world. And so when you think, well, let's do it 11 night, I'll start that at 10 because I've always write those things in an hour, you're going to get surprised. Maybe not the first time, but things are going to take longer than you anticipate because it is just a different level and expectation. And with that, and I think this is really important for students to be aware of, sometimes students assume that they receive a level of grace that their professor is not willing to extend. And that's not every professor. I don't want to give the impression that every professor on your college campus is going to be mean and they're going to hold the deadlines and you're just out of luck. But you're going to run into those, and you may not know that that's who they are until it's too late. And a lot of times in that high school experience, you get, well, I know you had a baseball game or you had a choir concert and you couldn't get this paper done. A couple of days, get it to me and that'll be fine. That's not necessarily how college works. In fact, most of the time it's not. So again, as we go back to reading the syllabus, it's really important to know what those grace points look like. So if you turn to what's going to happen, and understand for some of your professors, if it's due at 11:59, 12:02 is late. And they will go ahead and for some of them, it's not because they're not up at midnight checking, so it doesn't matter. That was me. Do it 11:59. If you get in by 6, I'm not going to know the difference. I don't care about the timestamp. But you're going to have some who don't feel the same way. So I think understanding that you going to a professor with a sob or even maybe sobbing may not get you the same thing that it got you before. And it's important to know that they're all different. And so what might have been okay in one classroom is not going to be okay in a different one each semester. So again, understanding those rules, knowing what the expectations are, all of that stuff. And I'll say one more and I'll stop because there's a lot. This is an area I think a lot about. Getting snarled up in academic integrity challenges. And this is a longer conversation. We can certainly have it, but just to kick it off, students can get away in high school. I'll just say that, and that's not a knock on high school teachers. That's not a knock on the way high schools don't necessarily have the resources that colleges do to check some of these things. Your college has a system for knowing if you plagiarized your paper or not. Your college has a system for knowing whether or not you used AI to generate your paper. Now, I've got for those checkers, but they have them. And some of your professors take them as gospel. So it's not easy, but it happens more frequently than you might think, where do what they have always done, not necessarily knowing that it's problematic, and then find themselves with an academic integrity that now they have to defend. There may be grade penalties. There may be all kinds of challenges that come with that. And it could be completely innocent. I've seen a lot of that where students just didn't know. So I think being very aware that that's a real thing, I never want students to be afraid of anything, but at least to come in with eyes open as to what plagiarism is, what the AI policy is, what the test policy is. Is it okay to use your notes on an online test like you did in high school when nobody said if it was okay or not?
You're right. That is a much bigger conversation,
Yes.
and it is such a hot topic with everyone. It is top of mind. And I will just tell you, it not only does it look different by school, but it's going to look different by professor.
Yes.
And there are some professors that are integrating the use of AI into their curriculum, and others who don't even want a whiff of it. And, those AI checkers, they're not always accurate.
They're bad.
So they really are. So you do need to be cognizant of that. And one of the ways, two thoughts, if you ever need to plead your case with a professor, something happens. You got bit by the squirrel in the squirrel watching club. If you have made friends or acquaintances with someone else in that class, they can keep you up to date on what was happening. Go to office hours.
Yes.
Every single professor will have them. Go early. And so you can start building that relationship before you need to call on that professor for help. Don't ask a professor for a letter of recommendation if you have never been to office hours. And
Right.
so I feel so strongly about that. So talking about office hours, because I think that's something that students coming from high school may not realize that happens. But what are some of the other resources on campus do you recommend students familiarize themselves with?
I actually have a whole list in the book of things that they need to go find on the first day. So you've hit a button, and we could talk about this for a long time too. I think you need to know where the writing center is. Even if you think you're a fantastic writer. My older daughter she got a professional writing degree. She is a novelist and a professional writer. That's what she does. She used the writing center when she was an undergrad because she was confident in her writing, but she also just wanted an extra set of eyes. So, that doesn't hurt. And most schools now, if they have a writing center, they even have an online thing where you can submit it via email or through a portal and they kick it back to you in 24 hours. Again, why would you not? If it's now, you've got to be ahead of time, right? You have before the due date. You can't send it an hour early and hope you're going to get feedback. So I think the writing center is a really important place to know. Same is true of the math lab, computer. I mean, all of those things that will help you navigate things in your class. I are really critical. I also would recommend students know where the accommodations and disability services office. You may not need that, and that's great. Glad for that. But if you think you might, it doesn't necessarily have to be big, huge, obvious disability. We think about things, but maybe not think about challenges related to ADHD or other mental health challenges. Those kinds of things can also get you accommodations for class. So it's good to know who those people are and how to connect with.
And don't you find a lot of times out of that office, you get time management workshops and things like that?
Oh yeah,
that are beneficial to everyone.
Absolutely. Anything like that, right? That gives you tools to help you be more successful. I think this is going to sound really silly as I say it, to know where the library is and to know how to use it. Now, you probably will be able to identify the library. It's a building usually in the middle of campus because it was one of the first things they built. But there are students who don't know where the front door is because they've never bothered to darken it. And there's just so many resources there, including, like you say, lots of on using the online tools, on how to use, EBSCO and databases and things like that. The library at our college has webinars and seminars weekly, and some of them are so incredibly helpful for students, and I hope they take advantage of them. But that's, you find out about what those kinds of things are when you go there, or when you're checking your email, because remember, you're doing that every day when you set that alarm. We're just going to keep calling back things, right?
Yes, you have to. Yeah, and the other thing I'm going to call out is your career center.
Absolutely.
Know where that is. It's rough out there. So if you are fortunate enough to have a career advisor, take advantage of that. otherwise, just get very familiar with your Career Center. Start building that resume and your LinkedIn page early, because it is going to surprise you how early you need to start applying for internships and summer jobs and things like that. And so students do all of this. Things go awry a lot of times that first semester. How do you recommend students recover? Maybe they get that midterm back that wasn't quite what they were expecting.
We probably all had that experience of the first coming back, and you realize, oh, wait a minute, I should have studied differently than I did for this thing. It doesn't work the same way here.
Or I should have just studied.
Or at all, right. I had it. All of my kids had it, where it's kind of that wake up call of, oh, this is different. And again, and I don't want to keep pointing back to the book, there's a whole chapter on what do you do, because I do think there's so many different things that can happen. But I think a couple of things in general that students keep front of mind if things go wrong. Hopefully they never will, but if they do, kind of what to do. And I think the first is, whatever that thing is, whether it's failing a test or it's failing a class or it's an academic challenge, whatever it is, understand that nothing is over. I think students just completely shut down when something goes, sometimes some students, when something goes wrong, and just like, well, that's it, I can't do this, I'm done, and walk from it. And that's not the case.
Yeah.
Never. It's never. If you get kicked out of school, it's still not over. There are other colleges out there, and you can reset and try again. So I think recognizing that, you're not a miserable failure, even though that's what F stands for, and I hate that, and that's a whole other conversation as well. But it just this idea that nothing is over, you can reset, you can recover. I think the second thing that's really important is to be honest with yourself. It's really easy to blame the professor. Well, they're just mean, or they didn't prepare me, or, whatever. Or sometimes we have to look in the mirror and say, maybe it's me. Maybe I didn't prepare you. Or, one of the things I say in the section we talk about academic integrity charges, the first question you need to ask yourself is, did you do it? Intentionally or otherwise, right? And that requires a level of honesty that yes, use the thing they said that I used, even though it was innocent, I didn't know, I wasn't supposed to, whatever, that's fine. But I've had the experience where students came screaming that I didn't do this thing, and everybody shows, well, you did, like it's right here, because they don't always know what we have. But I think it's also important then to be honest with faculty. If something happens and you need to apologize, or you need to explain, and we're back to communication and back to relationship. That faculty member who you've been to their office hours, they know you, that you can go and you can say, okay, I messed up. I didn't prepare for this the way I should have. Can you help me? By the way, is one of the greatest things a faculty member can ever hear. When a student comes and says, can you help me? The answer is always going to be yes. Pointing to resources, whatever it is, but we want to do that. And then it's, what can I do to fix it? Right? How do I move forward? How do I take the next step? What is the next step? And again, that's part of that honesty, of that, willingness to understand and know what's going on. But I think it's so critical that we don't get locked up in one moment, because it's so easy to do. And one moment doesn't define you. I tell students that all the time when we're having deflations
right.
about integrity or whatever else. Like, this doesn't define you as a student or as a person. So how do we move forward from here? I think is a really important mindset for students.
I agree with you, because it can be so demoralizing, but I want students to realize that every college wants you to be
Yes.
there, right? No matter what happens, there are people who are going to work with you to keep you at that college. Sometimes, it's because they they want to keep their retention rates up,
Right.
Whatever it may be, but the school definitely wants you there. So now your student lives on campus. They are getting through, they are making friends, they're joining clubs, they've made it through midterms, and it's Parents Weekend coming up. So let's bring it back to parents a little bit. What's a good rule of thumb for parents visiting students. And now I understand, like, you had a daughter who was just an hour or so away. So I mean, that's a little bit of a buffer, not a huge buffer. But what is usually good to expect for family visits?
I think so. The first thing you have is what frequency looks like. And there's a reason that colleges schedule things like weekend as intentional. Now there's money and other things going on too, but also intentional opportunities for parents to come. I don't needs to be more than a couple of times a semester because your student may be coming back and forth too. And every family is different. And I don't want to say this is how you should do it, but I think it's important for parents to understand your student has a life on that campus that you don't know about. And that's okay. Now, maybe some things that are part of that life that aren't okay, but that's a different conversation again. But they have obligations, they have meetings they have to go to, they have exams they have to study for, significant others that they need to see. I mean, all that stuff. They have friends that they want to go out with. And parents, I think it's important to go and to see your student in their environment. I think that's really helpful, especially for moms and dads who struggle with letting to see that they are doing well and they are happy and they do have this whole world that's theirs. It's kind of fun to watch. But I think it's also important to realize that because that's true, just like when you move them in, they may have a meeting. When you come for Parents Weekend, they may have something else that's going on too. And so, you want to be with them, but you also don't want to feel like, okay, I'm going to be here for 55 hours and you have to be with me every one of them. You give them their space.
Right.
And I think, again, take them shopping, right? Restock that fridge because it's going to need to be restocked at some point. And also the other thing I do is go find a great meal that you can take them for. And if you can, grab a couple of their friends to take too. Because a lot of times, like on Parents Weekend, not everybody's mom and dad can come. And so some of those kids are feeling like, don't have anybody. Be their mom and dad for that weekend. We did that with all of our kids and just had a blast, with these. And you don't have to be, doesn't have to be an expensive meal. You can go find a pizza joint somewhere, but just someplace you can get away, have fun together, and let them eat something that's not dorm food or, campus food. That's always a good thing. But just get it from the college space, even for a few minutes or an hour or so, be a full family thing as opposed to mom and dad are in my space. And it also gives a student a chance to show off the places they like to eat, their town, and things like that they're excited about.
I think that's one of the best things, and is to see your student in their environment. And
Oh, yeah.
I admit, I'm a terrible parent. I haven't made it to Parents Weekend. 3 years, haven't gone. Timing just is terrible, but I have made it up to the frozen tundra of Chicago in February to see plays that my student is not in, but is running sound for. So,
that's cool.
I mean, good job on the sound design, honey. And I loved it.
Yeah.
I think being able to see your student doing whatever it is they do,
Absolutely.
either, on the football field or speech and debate or in the orchestra, whatever it is, it really is just so special that they're building this life
That's exactly it.
that, I am not really a part of. Bittersweet.
Friends, if you like what you've heard from Jay Hall, check out his book, College Unpacked. It was just released a couple months ago. And the subtitle is A Practical Guide to Choosing, Preparing for, and Excelling in College. You can get it on Amazon and every other place where you buy books. Friends, this concludes this part of Jay Hall's interview with Lynda. Hope you'll join us next week for the next part. On Thursday's episode, Julia joins me to answer a question from two students who are twins from Rochester, Sapna and Sivan. We are going to answer one question on episode 547. And then they had a second question, which I'll take up next Monday on episode 548. While part 3 of Jen Mandel's interview which involves us taking a second question from a listener. This is from Diana from Idaho. And she wants to know if her student needs to go to a top 20 college to get a job on Wall Street. Jen joins me on that because she's got an interesting story to share. Finally, we have the final interview with Dr. Bob McMahon, the president of Kettering. But, we kind of finished up our Kettering sections on the first 4 parts. So this time we're talking about something completely different. I'm asking Bob, when you network with other college presidents, what is keeping them up at night these days? And Bob answers this question, and Bob goes on the hot seat. And friends, remember, it's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's not where you go. It's what you do when you get there. It's what you do when you get out of there. That is what will determine your career trajectory. And I believe that with every fiber of my being. See you on Thursday, friends. And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. If you find this podcast helpful, please follow us and you will get every single episode as soon as they are released. If you want to support our podcast, you can click the share button and send it to your friends and acquaintances. You can say positive things about your college-bound kid on your social media feed. And you can help us stay commercial-free and pay our staff by donating on the yourcollegeboundkid.website. You can write a review for us on Apple or Spotify. And if you have a question or a recommendation, just go to speakpipe.com/YCBK, hit the orange button, and speak. We will do our best to get your question in your own voice on an upcoming episode. I am the producer of the podcast, and I live in Metro Atlanta. We have a fantastic team that has over 200 years of admissions and counseling experience. Shout out to our co-hosts, Dr. Lisa Ruff in North Carolina, Susan Tree in Pennsylvania, Vince Garcia in California, Julia Esquivel in Massachusetts, Lynda Depker in Missouri, Andy Strickler, the Chief Enrollment Officer at Connecticut College, New London, Connecticut, Hillary Dickman, an Admission Officer at Colorado College in Colorado Springs, and our International Admissions Expert, Kevin Newton in Dallas, Texas. Our sensational sound engineer is Nemanja Motvich. Our amazing music is from Victor Allen Weeks. Marketing designs from Kimberly Bloss. Our reliable webmaster is Stylionis Dimitru. Website updates are done by Joyce Stucker. Our image editor is Vlad Honchar. If you want to have a coaching session with me, just text me at 404-664-4340. If you want to reach someone else on our team, all of our bios with contact info can be found at yourcollegeboundkid.com under the About YCBK tab. If you want to get our free monthly YCBK newsletter, YCBK Plus, it is also under the About YCBK tab. If you want to see our recommended books and websites, they are on our website under the Resources tab. While you're on our website, check out our hundreds of interviews in their entirety. Check out our college spotlights, our blog, and our upcoming events. We think of you as our listening family, and we look forward to meeting with you every single Monday and every single Thursday.